2 of each for each vehicle. So take the 12 ring caps and cut them, and the 8 ring caps here, you can see that there's a huge size difference between them. So these we're going to fix to these rear small axles, and so cut them free and then cut this armature that they're on off. You don't have to be super careful about cutting it perfectly, and be careful using this blade this close to your fingers because it's easy to cut yourself, but you can just zip that off without having to worry too much about taking part of the cap or leaving a little bit of the armature on there. You need to remove most of it, but you're not trying to be it's not a visible part, so you don't have to worry about being perfect. And then take some 4-to-1 glue. You can use straight glue for this as well. And just put it inside the cap. And set the cap on these little nubbins. Press it right against the edge. Just leave that to dry for quite a while. So we'll do both of those. You want to get it right up against here. You don't. It needs to be as short as basically just the cap space taken up. So again, just putting some inside the cap, and then popping that onto there. Okay, so now that we've got that done, let's continue with the 12 ring caps. So with these ones, you do want to be careful because they are visible. So when you trim the armature off, just try to follow the shape of the cap really carefully. You're going to need 2 of these for each vehicle you're doing. And same thing, just fill the inside with some glue. You don't have to fill it full because obviously a lot of it's going to be pressed out when you put it onto these front axles. You want to make sure that it's flat, so the end of this is at the same angle as the main hull. You'll sometimes find that it's a little bit loose on there, especially if your matchstick has deformed while inserting it through the holes. So just make sure that they're set on there correctly. See a little gunpowder in there. I think I left this a little bit long. And there was just some, I hadn't ground it down, like removed the bits from the end there, so it was keeping the cap from going. You don't want them quite flush with the hull, but you want them close. And that wasn't going where I wanted it to be, so I just trimmed that down. Now, when you're setting the wheels in, one of the a good strategy to use is to go from, like, obviously look at this part a little bit, but you're trying to go from the back. And if I set this wheel here and then I try to set this wheel in next to it, I'd be tempted to set this wheel more towards this side, because it just looks weird when you're doing it. So the best strategy to use is to set them like this, and then do the inside ones, so that you're not tricked into putting them farther away from each other than you want to. So I'll just do a set of these wheels here. Now horizontally, you want to get these as right on target as you can. Up and down, there's a little bit of leeway. But you definitely want to have them in the proper position, right in the middle of where they're supposed to go. Shouldn't really have to hold them there for long before they bond. You might want to use full strength glue. I'm using 4:1. Full strength glue bonds a little bit quicker, and it bonds a little bit quicker if you don't use much as well. So I'm probably using too much, which is why it doesn't bond instantly. So just try to use, when you're doing this, the highly spaced ones, just try to use your judgment and seeing that there's about the same amount exposed. You can also kind of set it on a ruler to make sure that they're well spaced. Like, you'll be able to see whether that center button is keeping one of the other buttons from hitting or not touching itself. These are pretty even. So that's a good way to kind of tell whether you're on target or not. And if you're not on target, just pull a button off that's in question, stick it back on. It's not a big deal. And then once you've got those three, you can go ahead and put in these middle ones. And you should be able to tell if you need to move it side to side to get right. Because, I mean, you're going to notice if the button's too close to the ones on either side of it. But you're not really going to notice if it's not sitting directly on this part perfectly. Now, these two front buttons are supposed to be a little bit further away from the rear three ones for some reason. It's just how it looked on the model I used. So if there is a bit more of a gap toward the rear than the front wheel, that would be accurate. So all I'm saying is these three are a little bit closer together than these two are to each other or to them. And that is what it's supposed to look like. So if it looks a little odd, that's fine. Okay, and the last step would be taking some crazy glue. I thought I had an open one, but I don't. Oh, there it is. Yeah, this will work. So crazy glue or super glue, it's instant bonding glue. And because we're doing plastic to plastic, that's why we're using this kind of glue. And so you just want to bond your 9mm button to this rear axle thing. And the top level of it should be pretty much right with these wheels. So if it's not quite in the right spot, you might need to adjust it one way or the other. And if it doesn't bond in instantly, try and bond it again, because you have to get, when you're using the super glue, if it doesn't bond right away, you're not getting the full strength of the bond. So just pull it off and redo it. And it should be pretty much level with the layer of the wheels. Now it might stick out a little bit further if you've used the rocket candies. It's quite common. I wouldn't worry too much about that. It'll look okay. But everything should be pretty much on the same plane. So that's buttons. Essentially the same exact operation to do the rocket candies, but the rocket candies are a little bit larger in diameter. It's actually a little bit closer to the diameter of the T-34 wheels. There wasn't much space between them at all. So I will show the process. It is a little bit different. So the same way we did the other buttons in judging distance between each other by putting the first three on independent of the close ones. It's just, there's a bit of a I like to call it an optical illusion almost, that makes you space the buttons wrong unless you do it this way. At least it makes me do that. I don't want to say that it does that to everyone. So with these, you're going to find that this wheel is really close to that front roller. So you might want to back it off a little bit, just so you don't get glue and paint and stuff forming a little skin between here. So if you can put the tip of a round toothpick between them, then that should be enough room. You don't want to have them much closer than that. So if you have to back this off till it's not really centered on its thing, so be it. You really don't want that. That attachment effect looks kind of silly. So once you got the three in, it's a little bit easier to judge for the rest of them. And again, these back wheels may end up a little bit closer together than the front ones. That is proper. It's not a huge difference, but there is a slight difference. As you can see, these are all quite close together. There's barely even room to stick anything in between them. So when we do paint and glue these, if you notice a skin developing, instantly run something between there and just get that out of there, because it will show in the end. And you can use this to judge whether they're close enough to level. Now you can see this one's a little bit high, but it's not bad enough that I'll pull it off, because when I put the track on, it'll pretty much just look like that center wheel's on a bit of a rock or something like that. So it's not horrible to have a little bit of variation up and down. You just don't want anything massive. And same thing for attaching the rear. Now if you have some slightly thinner 8mm, 9mm buttons, you might want to use those if you're using the rocket candies, and slightly thicker ones if you're using buttons. Because you can see that I've quite successfully matched this level, even though this is quite a bit thinner than this, just by using a thinner button than this thicker button.